Minimum wage is coming to Uber all across the nation. It's probably going to happen. I don't think you can stop it. So let's discuss it. Hey everyone, this is Kevin the Apptrepreneur, and yeah, we're talking about minimum wage Uber driving again. Now, this is a very hot topic issue on this channel. Whenever I bring it up, people get very spirited and passionate about the topic. Some people say, heck yeah, I want minimum wage. Other people are like, no, I don't want to be treated like an employee. I want to be an independent contractor. My stance has always been pretty consistent. I would prefer to be an independent contractor, but frankly, I'm being treated like an employee anyway. And Uber's changed so much to make it very difficult for me to make more than minimum wage anyway, that I would prefer to let's just cut the BS. We're minimum wage workers. That's what you want to pay. You've already tweaked the algorithm and the surge and the upfront pricing to the point where, yeah, that's pretty much what we are. So let's just call it for what it is. It's a minimum wage job. And I'm sure that debate will continue to reign. Now, when New York City said that implemented like a minimum wage requirement for Uber and Lyft, and we've talked about it a lot on this channel, I was a little excited, but also, well, now that it's here, how's it going to actually work? And I think we haven't quite gotten to that point yet. How is it working? Is it actually helping? I mean, we know the customers are paying more for their rides, but are the drivers actually making more money? I've had people tell me not really, and the fight for minimum wage or 15 an hour, whatever the heck it is, for Uber and Lyft might just be a pipe dream. But apparently other states are going to be chiming in, specifically Connecticut, as their legislators are going to consider a minimum pay for Uber and Lyft drivers. According to this article, prompted by a growing number of frustrated Uber and Lyft drivers, lawmakers will hold a hearing on establishing minimum pay for app-based drivers. After 3 separate legislative proposals regarding pay for drivers flooded the Labor and Public Employees Committee, you gotta love ads, don't you? Like, pause that. I don't want to. Well, it's not pausing for some reason. Anyway, we're just gonna have to ignore it. The committee will raise the concept of driver earnings as a bill, said Representative Robin Porter, Democrat, New Haven, who chairs the committee on Friday night. A coalition of Uber and Lyft drivers from New Haven has been pressuring lawmakers to pass a pay standard following New York City's landmark minimum pay ordinance for app-based drivers, approved in December. The legislation, which set an earning floor of $17.22 an hour for the independent contractors, took effect on February 1st. So yeah, it's not even 2 weeks later. We don't know how this is working yet. And that's one of the things that I wish. I wish we would take a moment. Like, let's give New York a few months, maybe a year even. Let's see how it works out before we start implementing it everywhere. This might be the answer, but it might not be. We might be making things worse, and we don't want to make it worse. We want to make it better. So we just don't know the impact. This is why we need a couple states to really do things. I mean, New York has passed a minimum wage law. Seattle, come on, Seattle, please unionize over there. Let's see what Uber looks like under these systems. But anyway, continuing. Connecticut drivers have no minimum pay guarantees, except probably during, the guarantee promotions. Guillermo Estrella, I think that's how you pronounce it, who drives for Uber, worked about 60 hours per week last year and received $25,422.65 in gross pay. His pay stub doesn't reflect how much Estrella paid for insurance, gas, oil changes, and wear and tear on the car. Factor those expenses in, and the Branford resident said his yearly take-home earnings were about $18,000 last year. Estrella and other New Haven drivers have suggested bill language to cap the portion of riders' fares that Uber and Lyft can take at 25%, with the remaining 75% heading to drivers' pockets. Now that I look at that, that might be a good compromise. Because what's been one of the biggest hurdles to drivers making more money? It's the upfront pricing and the upfront surge. I would actually think most of us would be in favor of a law that said, if you are app-based and it's like a system like Uber and Lyft, you can't do an upfront pricing thing with them. You just can't. You have to be transparent about what the ride cost and exactly how much you're taking, and it has to be a solid percentage. So if Uber settles on 25 or 30% that they're going to take from you, it has to be that regardless. Regardless. And yeah, that means that we might go back to customers guessing what the fare is going to be in some cases. They're going to call the Uber and they're not going to be told the price up front. Of course, then that's a problem for the riders then, because riders should in theory be told roughly what the ride's going to cost. But you know, they should be given like an estimate, like, okay, if you go this far, this is roughly how much you're going to pay. And with a little asterisk underneath that says, by the way, if you do side trips or anything, that may add to the cost of your Uber or Lyft. So having a bill that says they can only take so much from the drivers, I think we could get behind that. I'm still not sure about this minimum wage thing though. The idea has already received pushback from Uber, not surprising, which said it was unrealistic given their current pay structure. Well, why is it unrealistic, Uber? Why is that not realistic? You were doing 20% for years. It seemed to work just fine. Why is that? Oh, given their current pay structure. Yeah, because their current pay structure pretty much says we're going to pay you for miles and stuff, but they don't factor in surges and all the Uber, jerks. Connecticut legislators have suggested two other models for regulating driver pay. State Senator Steve Cassano, Democrat Manchester, filed a bill to set a minimum pay rate per mile and per minute for drivers. His bill has not assigned numbers to those minimums yet. And by the way, that's one of those things that's like, yeah, that sounds good. I'm not sure if I'm for that because unfortunately, if you make a law that says this is the minimum you have to pay, guess what? That's always what the minimum is going to be. It's never going to go up until you write new legislation that says it has to be this high. So that I wouldn't be too much in favor of. What drivers were making when Uber started and got its name, they are not making that anymore, said Cassano. The company is taking advantage of the success of the company. That's an interesting sentence. I understand that to a point, but it shouldn't be at the expense of the drivers. Okay, I can agree with that. State Representative Peter Tarsiak, a Democrat again from New Britain, proposed legislation that says if drivers' earnings do not amount to hourly minimum wage payments, Uber or Lyft should have to kick in the difference. Connecticut's minimum wage is $10.10. Oh, clearly they can meet that. Although Democrats are making a strong push this year to raise it. So if you're going to push that one, you might want to wait until after you raise the minimum wage. A lawmaker considered these proposals. They will confront issues. Wait, actually, that wouldn't have any difference. I'm sorry, folks. Yeah, it would obviously just raise with it. They will confront issues raised by the growing gig economy, a clash between companies seeking thousands of flexible, independent contractors in a workforce that wants the benefits and rights of traditional paid employment. Well, my personal perspective has always been if you want traditional employment, I think you should look for traditional employment. I don't think you should be looking for these jobs, but, you know. Some Democrats at the Capitol support the changes that favor drivers. Quote, I thought it was important to make sure our labor laws are keeping up with the changes we are seeing in this emerging gig economy, that we have sufficient safeguards to make sure that drivers are not being exploited, said Senator Matt Lesser, Democrat, Middletown. But the proposals also raise broad, difficult questions like what protections does a large independent contractor workforce need? And how would constraining the business model of Uber and Lyft impact service availability around the state? Senator Craig Minor, a Republican, of course, the opposing Republicans, of Litchfield, who sits on the Labor Committee, wondered why Uber and Lyft drivers should have guaranteed pay when other independent contractors do not. In all fairness, this is a good point. How would this impact the tax benefits realized by independent contractors, he asked. Uber and Lyft declined to provide data on how many drivers they have in the state, and the Connecticut Department of Motor Vehicles does not keep count. In Connecticut, 82% of Lyft drivers drive fewer than 20 hours per week, said Colleen Richard, a Lyft spokesperson. Yeah, but unless you make that hard data available, it's hearsay at this point. Last week, Hearst, Connecticut media spoke to 20 Uber and Lyft drivers in New Haven who are demanding lawmakers protect their pay. All drove full-time for Uber or Lyft or both. An immigrant from, I don't know how to say that, Estrella, the Branford driver, struggles to pay for rent and groceries for his pregnant wife and 7-year-old son using his Uber wages. Quote, a cup of coffee at the local Starbucks costs $3 to $4. How How can a trip cost $3 when you have to drive to them 5 minutes away and drop them off after 7 or 8 minutes? That's a fair question, actually. I actually thought it was going to go somewhere else with that Starbucks thing, but no, that's a good point. In December, 50 Uber and Lyft drivers held a strike in New Haven demanding better pay. The New Haven drivers last week said they are planning more strikes soon. Quote, why is Uber lowering the rates and why do we have to say yes to keep working? Well, you don't. You can quit. Just pointing it out, you can quit if you want. The drivers believe Uber and Lyft are decreasing driver pay and taking a larger chunk of riders' fare for company profits. Duh, you think? Many New Haven drivers said pay per mile has been decreasing. They like Senator Cassano's idea of setting minimum pay per mile per minute. But again, the problem with that is once you set that minimum, that's all you're going to make. The payment by mile, it went down by 10 cents, said Rosanna Olen, a driver from West Haven. Before, it was more than $1, and now when you have a big truck SUV working long distance especially, it is not worth it anymore. Uber and Lyft both declined to provide pay rates per mile and per minute for drivers, but you can find that information out on the website. Drivers are not paid for time spent driving to pick up a passenger, nor for time spent idling, waiting for a ride, although the company's model depends on having drivers ready to pick up passengers at any moment. Lyft said nationally, drivers earn an average of $18.83 an hour, but did not provide Connecticut-specific earnings because it's not in their interest to do so. Quote, our goal has always been to empower drivers to get the most out of Lyft, and we look forward to continuing to do so in Connecticut and across the county, said Rich Power, public policy manager at Lyft. Uber discouraged lawmakers from considering the driver's proposal of capping the transportation company's cut of rider fares. Uber spokesperson Harry Hartfield said the idea wouldn't work because Uber no longer uses the commission model. That stopped about 2 years ago. I think this is actually the first time that Uber has actually publicly acknowledged that they no longer use the commission model, which should raise some question. Well, why are you advertising the commission model then? Why do you tell passengers whatever you pay, they're getting 20% of that, when you clearly are stating that's not the case? I'm wondering. That's an interesting omission. In order to make sure we can provide customers with an upfront price, driver fares are not tied to what the drivers pay, said Hartfield. In fact, on many trips, drivers actually make more money than the drivers. Yeah, no, not on most trips. Because here's the thing. When you say something, when you say something like this, like, oh, sorry, my mouse is not, why is it not highlighting there? Technical difficulties. When you say like, on many trips, the driver actually makes more money than the rider pays, then the question is, well, how are you making money then? What's your benefit in that? So anyway, what the rider pays to Uber is an estimated price calculated before the ride starts, Hartford explained, while the driver receives from Uber a fare that is calculated based on actual drive time and distance. Changing the model could make it hard to give customers upfront pricing and lead to reduced price transparency, Hartfeld said. I'm sure you could figure it out, Hartfeld. New York's changes raise rates for riders. James Alexander, a New Haven legal assistant attorney who was working with the driver, said Uber's current pay model is, quote, irrelevant to how drivers want to be paid for the work. The reason that drivers care is it seems fundamentally unfair that the rider is willing to pay or has paid $100 for the ride and the driver has only gotten $30 or $40 of that, because it is unfair. Pursuing any of the 3 driver pay proposals would bring Uber and Lyft lobbyists back to the Capitol, where they negotiated legislation spearheaded by Representative Sean Scanlon, Democrat Guilford, from 2015 to 2017. Scanlon said the company eventually favored the bill passed in 2017, which after some compromise required drivers have insurance, limited surge pricing, mandated background checks for drivers, imposed a 25-cent tax collected by the state, and stated passengers must be picked up and delivered anywhere without discrimination. Quote, one of my biggest regrets about that bill, which I think is really good for consumers in Connecticut, is that we didn't do anything to try to help the driver, said Scallon, who briefly drove for Uber. Well, at the time when he was driving, he was making good money, so it doesn't enter your mind that this might be an issue. Now it is an issue, so now we're talking about it. So anyway, I've pretty much stated my piece, and this video is going a little bit longer than I anticipated. But here's the bottom line. Drivers are fed up with the pay. They really are. They're fed up with being classified as independent contractors but being treated like employees. Uber could, and Lyft, they could be avoiding this by actually giving some of the drivers what they want, but they're not. And as a result, legislation happens. And so if Uber and Lyft push us into legislating them even more, that's on them. I prefer not to be legislated, but again, they're kind of treating me like an employee anyway, so what do I care at this point, really? But anyway, that's where we're going to leave it. What do you folks think? As I know you've got mixed feelings about this, but I'd love to know them nonetheless. So comment below, like, favorite, share, subscribe. If you enjoy my videos, consider becoming a Patreon member. It's totally optional, but even as little as $1 a month goes a long way to helping the channel run smoothly, and you get access to my Patreon's exclusive blog. And as always, flame responsibly. Have a good one.